What point was it for you in your journey where you made that commitment to yourself to go, this is actually what I'm going to commit to? Because you had at some point you went, I got to do this work, and you dove into it. I know you talk a little bit about that journey.
Yeah.
Was there a specific point in that journey where you're like, I don't really know exactly what the outcomes are that come, but I know I have to commit to this internal game?
Yeah, I think it was 2016 when I went through a really tough time in my life, and that really opened my eyes to realize like my life can only go one or two directions, and it can either go down this dark path and continue down that, or I can put some work in and develop myself on a different level. And so when I really started to take an inventory of what was it that I was struggling with, I realized that my mindset overall, the anxiety that I dealt with was, I wouldn't say it was debilitating, but it was very present, and it didn't allow for me to operate at the best that I could. And I noticed that when I got into my first job, actually it was my second job, and I realized like day after day, I was just going to work, going through the motions, and I wasn't excited about it. I found myself overthinking, comparing myself. And so that's when I really had to get introspective and ask myself, where is all this coming from? And eventually, once I took an inventory of like, okay, these are just old patterns, old beliefs that I've said to myself so many times, and I'm tired of it. Like at some point, the pain of not changing became so great that I had to take a stand. Yeah. And when I did, which was closer to, like I said, 2016, more closer to 2017, and when I started to take in some of those tools, and one thing that I always share is, I got in learning about meditation. I would Google like, okay, well, how do you get rid of like all this anxiety? And I constantly saw meditation. I'm thinking, whatever, like it's not for me, whatever. Yeah. But I knew that every single morning when I go to the gym, which at the time I would get into the office at 6 a.m. So I would go in really early to the gym at like 4 a.m. And I would always go sit in the sauna afterwards. And I was just sitting there scrolling, because what else do you do at 5:30 a.m. and you're sitting in the sauna after workout, not realizing now after listening to all the Huberman podcasts and different things of how bad it is just to scroll that early in the morning. And what I found was, okay, I'm just going to go in, I'm going to do a guided meditation. Now, mind you, I use this free app, Insight Timer. If anybody's never used it, go use it. It's got tons of meditations, tons of different stuff you can use on there. Still free, still use it oftentimes to this day. But I would jump in and I'd use a 2-minute guided meditation. Now, was that actually helping? I'm not sure. But the fact that I was at least taking a step towards that helped me feel like, okay, I'm actually doing something for that. And that proved to myself that this could be worthwhile. Over time, that started to gradually increase, 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15, 20, so on and so forth. But it was some of those little pieces very early on to me that when I started to when I was at that point, that fork in the road, if you will, and I started to practice that, I became more keenly aware of how it was shifting my lifestyle and my mindset. And at that point, it was like addictive. It was like, okay, well, if this is all that can happen in 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes a day, what happens if it's more frequent or it's a longer duration? And that's where the possibilities of what was possible for me on a personal level started to really open up.
Yeah. It's cool when you say that, and you talk about the scrolling, but then the starting small with the meditation. All I was thinking about when you were saying that is this idea of like, what do I want, but what do I need, right? The want and need, and that's kind of like that fork in the road right there.
Yeah.
It's like, well, what I want to do is scroll. What I want to do is like go on autopilot and make this easy.
Sure.
But what I actually need is that 2 minutes.
Yeah.
Right? And it's just that little split decision time.
One of the very easy exercises, anybody could do this if they were watching this, is, putting a cost payoff analysis on the things that you have been avoiding. And so when I think about that, if I'm avoiding my mental and emotional fitness, what is it costing me? It might be costing me time. It might be costing me energy. It might be costing me money. It might be costing the presence in my relationship. But what is the payoff? The only real payoff is staying the same, staying in that comfort, staying in the familiarity. And so when you can see that's the difference between want and need, our body naturally wants the familiarity because it craves, I just want to go on autopilot for Pat. It would be much easier if I could just do this. Yeah. But what I actually need, if I really truly want these things to change, is for me to be able to shift and notice that I have to do something different and go to the unfamiliarity. And when people realize that how much it's costing them versus just getting over some of the unfamiliarity versus the payoff, if you will, it can be very eye-opening for individuals to see that all it takes is that one tiny shift, and it would no longer cost them those things. Instead, those would be payoffs, and the tables change. The only thing it costs them is a little bit of discomfort or potentially playing in the unfamiliarity for a little bit. Yeah. And that to me is a risk I was always willing to take.
So we're talking a lot about personal development. You're talking about your own journey. Obviously, why is this work just the most important to you?
Well, as I've evolved into this, I start to always consider, like, what is my mission? Why is this important? And now with the world that's ever changing, so much new technology, economy, markets, everything is shifting at an all-time rapid rate with AI and constantly getting better and better, and taking certain jobs. And so when I think about this now more than I ever did before, is one of the most important things we can do is come back to being human. And how do we amplify our ability to be as human as possible and leverage this vessel, leverage our mind, leverage our heart in that? And so it's like, what I found is, okay, everybody is on an even playing field, but most people just want to focus on the external, and that to me is them only operating at 80% capacity or potentially even less. But what I saw, and what really creates, and I got asked this the other day, was what's my passion behind it? Well, I saw that when not only I do the external stuff, but I actually take care of the internal things, when I get my heart and brain in order, that I can actually amplify every single piece of my life. And by seeing that, it really creates a level of excitement for me to be able to share that with others and to guide them to that point. And, one of my old coaches, his name is Justin Buonamo, and what he said was, you can't have the woo without the do. And so what he meant by that was, yes, you have to still go out, take action, which is the do, but you can also dive into the woo or the spiritual side or the religious side or whatever it is to get your heart and brain in coherence, or at least in alignment, so that when you do step in to take those actions, you're doing it from a level of like you have rocket fuel in your veins.
And it's hard too, because right, a lot of the things that we're talking about this internal game and these internal struggles, and really the only person who's truly knowing and navigating it is the individual themselves, right? And they're doing everything that they can to still show up, whether that's in their careers, in their personal lives, for themselves in some capacity, whatever that is. And so, it's really cool and interesting to hear about you kind of looking at them through this kind of inside out approach. I'd love to hear a little bit about a client of yours, or some stories around some clients that, again, on the outside, you look at the things, right? All the external things going on, and it's like, oh man, this person's got it going on, but truly they were struggling. And so I'd love to hear a little bit about, what some of those themes and people are coming in with.
Yeah, one of the ones that comes to mind is one of the recent clients I've been working with that I took through one of my signature trainings, which is called the Mental Performance Accelerator. And on paper, he looked like a lot of credentials. He was a chiropractor, or is a chiropractor, owned his own business. But when we got into conversation, it was very apparent that the way his business ended just a couple years before we started working together was still hindering him in his current day. And so you noticed a shift in his confidence, his ability to communicate, not only professionally, but in his personal relationships and his marriage, started to take a hit. And so we really started to dive in, like, what are the things that you're holding on to? What do you need to release? What type of animosity or anger have you held on to from something 1, 2, 3 years ago that's still impacting you today? And when we start to, dissect what that was and bring that to light, which can oftentimes be a little bit uncomfortable, but to be brutally honest with himself on what's going on, and then realizing how much of an impact and ripple effect that was playing, but then give him the tools and utilize some of the story work and some of the strategies to allow for that to be alleviated. He's then able to reignite his career, gets a brand new job, builds his confidence back up. When I talked to him recently, he said his marriage is way better than it's been in the past 6 months. Lots more communication, intimacy, being able to be present with them, having actual conversations versus, his wife walking in the door and not even saying hi at times, to where now now hi, kiss, hug, sit down at dinner and actually have conversations versus
Yeah.
sitting down at dinner and being in awkward silence. And so I always think it's really cool just to see that, yes, it can help individuals excel professionally, and a lot of times it does, but it also plays over into the personal side. And that's always a reciprocating, it's like a revolving door. If the individual is struggling personally, then it's going to go into his work, and vice versa. If work is being such a big stressor, when he comes back home with his wife, with his kids, with his family, his ability to be present is basically non-existent. I oftentimes see that guys will be physically at home but mentally still at work. And then all of a sudden 18 years go by and they're like, where did my time go with my kids? And if they were just to take the approach to understand, what does it take for me to get present, to separate myself and to no longer allow for that to run my life and run my thoughts, then they get into a position to get back time with their family, with their kids. And at the end of the day, that to many of them is priceless.
Even when you're sharing that, it's the idea of like, how do you win in all facets of life? And I wanna go to that at some point, but before you do that, I kind of want to start from the beginning piece, because when you were just giving this example of a client, you talked about this unpacking of like the past, in a sense. So is that how the process starts when you're working with people? Is that normally kind of where you start before moving forward?
Yeah, my biggest thing is to take an inventory on where they're at, not just where they're at, but what got them to where they're at. So if they're struggling with something, that's just the symptom of an accumulation of things that happened in the past. And so there's like 4 R's that I take individuals through. It's reveal, release, rewire, and then rebuild. And the first one is reveal. Reveal what is the true source. Right? Individuals say, I got this problem in my business, but oftentimes the business problem is disguised as a personal problem that's then lingered over into the business. So when we start to peel back the layer of the onion, you start to understand that, this is just a pattern that they might have been playing out from some past experience. The client that I was using, for example, the animosity and the anger that he had was held on from how his business closed down a few years ago with a business partner. And he was holding on to that, and he had replayed that situation so many times in his head that was now his mindset. And so if you came to him, you thought, wow, he's kind of an angry person. But he didn't just get all of a sudden labeled an angry person. It became over time. It was continued to, be repeated so much so that that's what he started to believe. And so, that's my biggest thing is we do have to go a little bit backwards into some of the stories, some of the patterns, some of the behaviors that really created that mindset for those individuals. But without that, then basically you're trying to change something external, or you're just trying to change your lifestyle without ever taking an inventory for what even got you there. And it just adds more layers and it creates more distance between actually being able to get over a lot of that.
And I would think it would also make things a little bit more intentional, right? Because then you're not looking at all of the things that you need to go and do and go, wow, this is really overwhelming, and you're going in a billion different directions. From what you're saying, it kind of sounds like by reflecting on the past or what has gotten you to present day, you now have maybe 1, 2, 3 nuggets of like, what if we just focused on this? And that probably turns into a lot of empowerment and intention that helps them go do and take action.
Sure. Yeah, 100%. And I also feel, and I've had my own experiences with therapy and whatnot, and my experience with therapy is going back into a lot of that, for lack of a better word, suck, like just stuff that you don't necessarily want to talk about. And what the difference is that I find with coaching is, yes, going back to that to notice it, to become aware of it, but then using that as a guide to then take the next step. So if we can pinpoint what are the top 2 to 3 things that are starting to show up in your personal or professional life now that are related to the past, we can then give them a little nugget and start to utilize that as a North Star to work towards. Instead of trying to do it all at once, which then becomes so overwhelming that then they just don't do any of it at all. We try to backtrack and find 1 or 2 things to work on at a time, and then build from that momentum in more of a snowball effect.
And what we're talking about, and what I hear you talking about right now, is just the whole idea of you are you, and how you show up and how you carry yourself and your perception on it. Everything impacts everything. I'd love to hear another example of just someone who's gone through this work with you, and that ROI for them hasn't just been personal. it's also been something that they've seen directly impact business itself.
Yeah. Well, I mean, right away, I think, that example is one, right? Okay, you start to change how you show up. You start to see things differently. You get in contact with people differently because they're actually more attracted to have a conversation with you. And all of a sudden you get a brand new job. Mm-hmm. But I also seen huge things where individuals hit record months in their business, double their revenue, hit President's Club in their job, be able to grow their team. I've had individuals who have landed some of the biggest deals that they've ever made. Thinking back into some other guys, like especially when they go through the Mental Performance Accelerator, it's a quick 6-8 week stint. And even in those 6 to 8 weeks, you'll start to hear okay, sign new clients, re-engage with new clients, closed more deals, hit a record month. And so those are some of the direct impacts. However, what I'll say is oftentimes those are the delayed gratification that only come as a result of the work that were put in 30, 45, 60 days beforehand. Sure. And so what I find is a lot of guys, until they won't believe this works until they see the external proof, but oftentimes they don't have enough patience to withstand the foundational time of that 30, 45, 60-day period to finally see it show up in their external world. Because it takes a little bit for our 3D reality to really dictate and show up for how we've been changing. So those are some big things. And, seeing individuals who hit record months in their business, become 7-figure income earners, literally not just revenue, but actually bringing in that much money. Yeah. And do I attribute all that to the work that we do? Absolutely not. They put in the work. They do a lot of the things, but it does help amplify their ability to bring that to life quicker.
What's that feeling like on the other side of it, right? Because you're talking a lot about this idea of this internal game and what's going on. And from what you've shared with me, it sounds like a lot of people have just been going at rapid speed to get all the things while probably still doing it through stress, anxiety, and all this stuff. Is there a shift in the internal feeling when those things are showing up for them?
Well, I think the one thing that comes to mind for them oftentimes is, why in the hell did I not know this sooner? And because what they're realizing is, oh my gosh, this feels way better. I'm still professionally successful. I have more peace of mind. And as a result, I've heard it multiple times. Oh, my partner said I act way different, not in a bad way, but in a good way. Sure. And so their feeling is oh my gosh, I've missed out on this to some degree at the beginning. But then after that, it's okay. Wow, this is so impactful. I don't want to give this up. And so that feeling is a level of empowerment that really comes with, wow, I have the ability to shift how I show up. And when I do, I get rewarded of that. How cool. Who would have thought that you just work on yourself, take care of how you show up physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, all of those things. It's just a natural byproduct that everything around you starts to change. I shared an event a few weeks ago, and I said that, intuitively, we all know that if we take care of this, everything else becomes that much easier. But if all we do is focus on all of that and we forget to take care of this, that's when things start to feel really, really overwhelming because we haven't realigned ourselves to be able to take care of all of that. So that feeling is also a level of empowerment to know that I am in control, even as oftentimes as it can feel like I'm not. I am in control, because if I can control my state, if I can control how I show up, if I can control how present I am with other individuals, that inevitably is going to be rewarded for me.
In your work, what's that core framework that you use to really help men develop their mindset?
Yeah, I shared it a little bit earlier, but the 4 R's, if you will, it's just a simple process for me to really take them through. And there's no real timeline on it because everybody's different. It's totally personalized, but it's 4 R's: reveal, release, rewire, and rebuild. So reveal meaning uncover, peel back the layers of the onion to take an inventory on where are they stuck at. Release is letting those go, not just mentally, but through the physical body and emotionally, and releasing that. And then finally, rewiring that, those new belief systems, then with that firm foundation in place, being able to rebuild a lifestyle on top of that. And so I often use this analogy that our mind is like a garden. And so most individuals, including myself at points, is we have this garden and it's got a bunch of weeds, got a bunch of dead roots, stuff that isn't really serving us. We need to take an inventory of that. First, what's there, so we know what tools to get us out of it. Then finally, we can get rid of those weeds, get rid of the dead branches, the roots, all the rocks that are in our soil. Now we got some great fertile soil to start to plant in, the rewiring process. Plant those seeds. Eventually, those start to create roots, just like they would with the connections in the brain. And over time, we rebuild from there. We water, we put in natural ingredients to fertilize it, of course, natural only. And then eventually, we help nurture it even more with sunshine, with water, and with continuous care. And so that's really the process that I like to take individuals through. And what I find really interesting is it's an always evolving process. There's always a season, just like a garden. Every single year, there's a winter, there's a spring, there's a summer, and a fall. But of course, it's all variable on where you live, and so that's dependent. But at the end of the day, we still get weeds in the garden just after we planted new seeds. So this work is always continuous, and that's the cool thing about when I work with individuals, who I've worked with individuals for over 2 years at some points. And it's not because that they aren't learning and they're not growing, but they're just moving into new seasons of life that require different aspects, different focus on what does it take for them to get rid of some of the weeds that have started to grow, and what are the new seeds that need to plant, because eventually as they grow, they're going to reach new problems and new situations that they have to create a different mindset shift around. And one of my mentors, he always said, new levels, new devils. And that's what I think about, is just because when you start working with me, you might grow to a certain point, but that doesn't mean that you're going to not stop growing, because when you keep growing, you're going to come up against bigger problems, and you're going to have to release some old beliefs, patterns, and behaviors, and you're going to have to start to instill new ones if you want to actually keep up with that level of growth and professional success.
Yeah, when you're sharing that, all I'm thinking about is it's not a straight line,
No.
point A to point B. It's more of this cycle,
Yeah.
right, with arrows, and
Yep.
and understanding that, like you said, new levels, new devils. There's always going to be things, and that's just natural.
Yeah,
Like,
that's life.
That's just life. It's you're there to support and be that space for them to go back into that cycle to make sure that muscle is worked.
Yeah. Well, and the cool thing is, though, once they've done that once, they know the process, they feel a lot more confident, and it can be sped up even quicker. And to me, that's very important to know, is that, yes, I've already done this once, which means I can do it again. And if I've done it once, just like if I've practiced anything else, right? Practice, hitting a golf ball. First time, not great. Second time, still might not be that great. But over time, you get used to this, and you start to take in an inventory of you doing it, and you start to train your mind that, oh, wow, I am actually really good at this. I've done it before. And so the doubt that can often creep in of, oh, I got to go back into this same process again, isn't as scary, and it can become even exciting.